Welcome, everybody, to the Super Smart Women podcast. I'm Karen Medina, your host, and I'm really glad you're here today. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. Hope that you'll enjoy this episode as well as others that I have. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you. We're so glad you're here. Today, I have another interview with another super smart woman. I have Deborah Kaminetzky. I'm going to make sure I say it correctly. Deborah has a wide and varied background. Started off in law, has ended up in project management and technology, and has various experience in between. And so, Deborah, I can read your resume off of LinkedIn to everybody. We'd probably spend 30 minutes just talking about your resume, which is quite impressive. But why don't you just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. So I started out my career as an attorney because I made my parents very happy by doing that. But I really love tech. And eventually, when they were no longer around to see it, I decided to pivot into technology. I'm now a project manager, and I'm also the mother of 3 adult children who are all gainfully employed, and quite proud of that as well. And
huge accomplishment.
Yeah, and they're fully functional. Like, they know how to cook, they know how to do finance, they know how to do everything, which is great.
And their own laundry.
Yes, and their own laundry.
That's amazing. Now, raising kids, there was a time early in my career where that wasn't like the big check mark on my list. I didn't, that was easy until you do it and you realize, you know what, that's not easy. And that's a huge calling and a huge accomplishment. For our audience, Deborah and I had an opportunity to visit last week and just had a great conversation. So before I launch into just a litany of questions, there were some things that Deborah talked about in our conversation, and I want to highlight some of those stories, Deborah, and get you to go and back and talk to the audience about some of these, because we've talked that as a super smart woman, you kind of check a couple of those pillars off. You've done a lot of work out of desire for serving others. You've been a mentor and a teacher, and you kind of really resonate with those pillars in the Super Smart Women platform. And so I want to talk a little bit about mentorship, because you talked with me about some of the others that you've mentored, and you told a story about a young woman that you mentored. So I just wondered if you would just share a little bit of that story, and then we're gonna kind of dissect it, and I'm gonna ask some more questions about it.
Okay, sure. So in my first role of actually being an official project manager, as opposed to a DeFacto project manager, which is the name of my company, I had a coordinator who I was working with, and she was very, very good with coordination duties, and frankly knew way more than I did in terms of data analytics and SQL and all of those kinds of things. But I was mentoring her because she wanted to become a project manager. She did not want to remain a coordinator the entire time. And even though she knew certain things I didn't know, I had a much greater life experience managing people, things like that. And she was starting to learn how to manage other people, which was something she had never done. She'd only had to manage her own work. So we went through a bunch of different scenarios. We had regular meetups every week. When she would ask me sometimes, how should I handle this? The first thing I would say was, well, what have you thought of so far? Because I don't want to just tell somebody, do it this way. The idea is she may have a better idea than I would, or she may have a great idea that we can refine further. And when you are mentoring somebody, if your ultimate goal truly is for them to succeed and possibly pass you, which some people have difficulty with, then you want them to be able to handle things when you're not there. I have had bosses who didn't actually want me to surpass them, and I've had bosses that did. So when you're trying to mentor somebody, the idea is not just that they won't need you, but they could wind up surpassing you. And that's a good thing, because they should do the absolute best that they can do. So this particular person, I left that company, and she eventually became the project manager there. And then I think maybe a year later, I saw on LinkedIn, because we've kept in touch on LinkedIn, that she actually got her PMP as a full-fledged project manager. And I was really just so happy, because that was what I wanted. I wanted her to reach the level she wanted to reach. I frankly think she should go now reach for something new. Obviously, still be a project manager, but there's still more. I think that she'll eventually do
Right.
amazing things.
Um, so there's, I've made some notes because there's some really important lessons, I think, for the people listening in the audience. When we talk about mentorship, sometimes those mentorship roles come to us in different ways. She happened to be a part of your team. And in getting to know her, you discovered what her aspirations were. Well, ding, ding, ding. There's first clue one is, if you want to be a mentor, you have to be really good at listening and diving in, asking some of those even invasive questions. That we're not going to talk just about what's going on this project. We're going to talk about, what do you want beyond this, so that you could begin to build that. So talk a little bit about how that part of the relationship started, because I'm thinking about those on the call that, one, are two groups that I would really want to hear what you're talking about here, is if they are in a position to be a mentor, how they need to nurture that role. And then if you're someone looking for a mentor, what you should be looking for in a mentor that's going to be good for you.
Okay, so first of all, the main thing I think that was really helpful was we did establish trust, because often somebody who's looking for mentorship wants the mentorship, but they're also afraid sometimes to say that they want more than the job that they're in. Part of that could be maybe they were afraid that their boss won't want them to surpass them, or won't want them to replace them, or any of those kinds of
Right.
things. Or if it turns out, and I've had other people I've mentored that wanted something other than, staying in that company, etc. So there's got to be some trust back and forth, that you really are going to work together. And I want to emphasize, you don't have to be friends to be able to be mentored or mentor someone else. And sometimes it is a little bit of tough love, like we talked about kids, right? So it's not always that you're going to always be, happy and smiling and, oh, yay. You're not just clapping for the person, right? You're going to point out if they could have done something better, go over what it is that they tried, what were they thinking at the time, in a kind way. Obviously, you're not going to be like, what were you thinking? But just, and what motivated you to do X, Y, or Z. So there definitely has to be trust.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
There has to be
Have
trust.
that depth of conversation and expect growth with someone if you haven't established that mutual trust. I love that. You also talked about that there was a definite structure to, it's almost like the mentorship becomes a project in and of itself. And when you're a project manager, like you and I are, we think about not only an active project that we're working on, but now I have this project of someone that I'm mentoring. So I'm going to have a schedule. I'm going to have milestones. And so you talked about, that y'all had regular meetups, that you talked about goals and things. So talk a little bit more about what kind of process and structure a mentor should look to put together for a mentee.
Okay. So in addition to being the mentor, I frankly directly managed her, but I gave her, let's say, a 90-day, roadmap of what the things were that I wanted her to accomplish. I gave her some smaller projects to be able to start doing some of the things that we had talked about. This was not immediately, it wasn't 5 minutes later, but after we had a few conversations, because I wanted to make sure that she felt comfortable on a smaller project where there were fewer balls in the air, right? And once she was showing me that she, was able to handle what I was giving her, I started giving her more. And I also asked, am I giving you too much? Right? Because you don't want them to be like, oh, gee, be careful what you wish for. And now I have way more than I ever dreamed.
And I don't
But
trust this person, so I can't come and tell them that I feel overwhelmed. So all of
right,
this
right.
weaving together.
Right. And it was basically like it's a project. You're breaking it down into the small tasks and the subtasks. And okay, first you're going to handle a small project and one person that you're going to interact with. And then, we'll go on to another project where it's a little bit bigger and there's a bigger team. And eventually, by the time I was leaving, she was so, so ready to take over. And I was really, really excited for her.
Excellent. You also you mentioned kind of the that questioning and that's that conversation, that's that engagement of taking the temperature or checking in, and that's a quality of a great project manager anyway, is that open door communication. So let's just talk about project management, because you can see a lot of just, I'm thinking about here, maybe I've got someone listening that's looking at a career change. Maybe they're going to do what you did and they're going to go from something that's over here, way over here, to something that's way over here. Not that being attorney, doesn't have aspects of project management, but switching over to technology, it was a big switch. So let's talk about career changes, and let's talk about the one thing that I've always thought was daunting, because I'm a de facto project manager. We talked about this. I don't have a PMP certification or a Six Sigma or a green belt, or there's all these things that people will hang behind, when they're looking for a project manager, that I think can be daunting for somebody who's looking maybe even to move into the project management world, but may have all the skills. So let's talk about career transitions and specifically that project management type role.
Okay, so yes, when I ran a law firm and I ran continuing legal ed for bar associations, there was a lot of project management and I managed those projects. I hadn't had any formal training in it. I just was very organized and I did what I thought was appropriate. When I decided to become an official project manager, I went and took a course at a local university here, Stony Brook, and I got a 4-month certificate. And then I ended up studying for the test, which was a project in and of itself. To be able to pass that test, it was during COVID. I had to go to a testing center, take the test on a computer. It was timed, etc. So there were all of those things involved.
And was that your PMP certification?
That was my PMP. That was the first one I got. Then I got the certified Scrum Master, which is an Agile designation. And then to top it off, because I just wanted to, I got the Lean Six Sigma Green Belt, because I wanted to have education and all the different methodologies, because when I'm consulting or when I'm working on a project, I want to have the knowledge of all those different methodologies to pull from, because sometimes you've got a scenario where you have to say, okay, what is the best thing for this scenario? And it's not necessarily going to just be one methodology over another. In terms of actually studying and taking the test, to me, that was not daunting. Granted, I did not know I was going to pass on the first try, but I just felt, okay, I'm going to study, I'm going to understand. And I will tell you, frankly, I did yoga poses during the breaks of the tests to sort of calm myself down, and that really helped. I did get some stares from some of the people in the testing center, but I didn't care, because I knew that when I came back for my next 60-minute session, I was going to feel more at ease with what I had to get done. And I would encourage somebody, if they're working in project management or have any projects, most people have projects at work. You can get the education if you don't want to spend the money and take the time for the test and all of that. That's fine. But learning some of the skills and methodologies are just great. It's just another tool that you have that you can use that will help you do your work better, which will help everyone. It'll help your company. It'll help your manager. It helps in real life as well. There's all kinds of projects in real life that once you have the idea of, oh yeah, I need a risk register, right? So then you'll write down all the risks and you won't have to worry, oh gee, what's going to happen? I didn't know this was going to happen, because you look at those in advance. So
we talked about this in our earlier meeting about the type of learner that, if someone has that teaching pillar, and I know you do, that one of the first characteristics you see is that lifelong learner, that curious learner. So that was probably a driving factor behind some of your career change. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I used to read a lot when I was a kid. Like I was one of those kids who would like, sit in the bathtub and read till like all hours because that way my parents didn't realize I wasn't asleep. So, I definitely like to learn. I always enjoyed it, and being able to put it to use is great as well. In terms of my teaching other people, I have, and I'm not bragging when I say this, but so far I have never met a software I have not been able to learn, master, and then teach to somebody else. And what it really comes down to is everyone learns differently. I love learning via video. I'm not big on learning via reading. I can do it, but I really like video, especially when it comes to technology, because you can actually see everything happening in real time. But when I'm teaching other people or training people, and I've trained a lot of people in my career on all kinds of things, not just continuing ed, but I've actually professionally trained people on teams and various other solutions. Not everyone learns the same way. And people enjoy learning in different ways. But the one thing that I think everyone has in common, most people like to be entertained at least a little bit while they're learning. So when I, for instance, would do continuing legal ed for one of the times I did it, I did
Which
skits.
can sound like really boring.
Well, yeah. Well, I had to take them when I was an attorney. I had to take them, and you typically would have somebody standing in front of a PowerPoint and reading to you from a podium, and that is really, really dry and really boring. So I tried to come up with things that were more interesting and entertaining. So there was one time when I basically made skits, and I asked for permission to ask for volunteers from the audience to play the parts in the skits. And this was an arbitration. And they said, sure. So I called people up from the audience, and we all went up there. I gave them their parts that were highlighted in yellow, and everybody really enjoyed it and paid attention. There was another time that I was actually flown in from Seattle to talk about, it was ADA compatibility on websites. And I could see this was after lunch, and frankly, people were kind of tired and, bored and whatever. And I just said, okay, we're gonna break for a minute. I'm interrupting my own presentation. Everybody get out your phone. I'm gonna teach you how to do something on LinkedIn that's gonna be life-changing. This was back in 2020. And I taught them how to use the QR code in order to connect. And a lot of them didn't know how to do it. And they were connecting with each other for a few minutes. I said, okay, everybody, back to your seats. We're gonna continue with the presentation now. And when I went back up to the podium, everybody was paying attention. And I was like, great.
Can draw people's attention back in. But I love where you talked about you use kind of that entertainment and that engagement. Every class that I've ever had that, was by default going to be, you would label it as boring. If the teacher had other ways of making the material interesting and engaging everybody in that process, it's transformative for a class. So for our aspiring teachers out there, great piece of lesson, because we do something very strange. When we're learning, we have this expectation. We want to be entertained. We like to see the videos. We like the interaction. But then suddenly we get thrown into teacher, and now I'm just going to stand and talk. I'm going to lecture. It's like, but you never liked learning that way. So why would you want to teach that way? But for a lot, that's they model the behavior that's been modeled for them. So I love that you're disrupting kind of that teaching methodology. I've done some websites and having to stop and think about, well, how do I make this ADA compliant? How do I ensure that we reach all audiences? And thinking about, and what are my legal requirements? Because maybe if this is in the educational field, it's overwhelming. So I can only imagine a class with all of the regulations and all the things that you're covering, how that could go if not taught in a fun and exciting way. So let's talk a little bit more about teaching, because it's probably one of the pillars that I've talked the least about, but I think it's one that probably has the most misconceptions, because when people think about teaching, as, am I someone that's gifted as a teacher? They think, well, I have to be in a classroom, I have to have students, but that's one way of teaching. But our world has opened up so much more. So let's talk about. I want to bring. You're a cancer survivor, and one of the things that you've talked about are ways that you share information with the world at large about cancer and about the importance of getting health checks. Talk about that, because I think that is a huge aspect of teaching.
Sure. So March is colorectal cancer awareness month, and I was what they call a young cancer survivor. I had it before the age of 50. This was 15 years ago. And I went for my screening and I had stage 1 already. Now, I did have a family history of it. What I do is every year in March, and also on my birthday, which is in November, I put out PSAs on my social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. I talk about the fact that I am living proof of the fact that if you go and talk to your doctor, find out when you should be screened, get screened, it's life not just changing, it's life saving. 15 years later, I'm still here to talk about it. And I have so many friends who've said to me, oh, it's just such an icky thing, I'm not looking forward to it, etc. And I'm like, okay, I get that, but look at all the things I've done since this happened. And that's how I'm teaching. I'm role modeling. People pass it on to other people. Someone said, how can I let other people know? I said, feel free to, repost my post. Like, I don't care who knows. It's not a secret. And I'm very proud of the fact that I made the lifestyle changes. I get the regular screenings. And granted, I don't know how long I'm going to have, but 15 years is pretty good so far.
To go from you've gotten a diagnosis, stage 1 colon cancer, to you're cancer free. Now you're 15 years later. And a lot of that early detection in any cancer is obviously the key. But when you said, people think about, well, it's icky. Well, hello, women, childbirth is icky. But we would never say, well, I'm not going to have a child because childbirth is icky. And I say this because, I am an absolute advocate as well. I have regular colon screenings. Colonoscopy is not the highlight of my year by any means, but it sure is relieving to walk away from a screening and have the doctor say, yeah, you're clear, you're great, everything is great. Just one less worry, because after something happens after 50 and parts start to break, if we had a car that lasted 50 years before the parts started to break, it would be an amazing car. But somehow, our bodies that we're even more abusive on, both from the inside and out, when they start to break at 50, it's very frustrating because we want a newer model, but we can't trade up, right? So the only way to do that, obviously, is to ensure that you're taking care of what you have. And part of that is through screening. So kudos to you for continuing the educational process for those that are thinking about it. I will say this, it's a lot less icky than it used to be. That prep part used to be just awful, the stuff you had to drink, but there are some new ways, and there are actually some new screening tests that you can do at home if you don't have a family history of it and you're just screening. So yeah, educate yourself, right? Educate yourself on what's available to you and what you need to be. We know on our cars, I know that I need to do an oil change every so many miles. I know that I need to change the time belt. There's lights that come on, but that doesn't happen in our own body. We don't have, lights that come on to say, oh, it's time to change the oil now, or, go in for
Wouldn't
a tune-up.
that be cool?
Wouldn't that
though?
be great? Right. There's probably an app that actually does that now, but we can't ignore the fact that there are warning signs in our bodies that say, hey, it's time to check out things. And there are standards that are developed off of data that says, data has said, and data is knowledge, right? So if data says you need to have a cancer screening, you need to have a mammogram, once a year, there's a reason. There's not just some doctors out there that have just said, hey, let's just have these women subject themselves to, a mammogram every year because it's fun and funny. It is not fun, and it is funny. And I love that we can laugh about those things now. But cancer screenings, including colon cancer screenings and breast cancer screenings, have dramatically increased the survival rates for cancer, over the last 10, 20 years. It's when you look at the numbers, they're astronomical. So I'm congratulating you on being a cancer survivor, and I am applauding you for using a platform that you have for your business to also advocate for self-care, which is huge. But you can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself. So kudos on that. So before we run out of time, there's always some, and Deborah, our conversations, I think you and I could probably do, a series of, 6 or 7 episodes and talk about so many different things. We share a lot in common. But I want you to, share some things. I have some questions that I always like to ask. You and I are both over the age of 40 now. I'll leave our numbers back there, but it might be a little bit more than that. But if I could put you in a time machine and travel you back to 13-year-old self, what would you tell your 13-year-old self?
I would tell my 13-year-old self to be more confident. I know that their 13-year-old girls are probably some of the least confident humans on earth, but to be more confident in what it is that I want to do and what it is that I'm capable of doing. I think a lot of us made certain choices that we made because we were told this is what you should do, even if we knew deep down that that wasn't what we wanted and that we could go ahead and do it anyway. Right. So I think I would go back and tell myself that. Not that I regret the law practice, because I do feel that it does make me an even better project manager because I've had that experience, but I would have had more, I think, just confidence to do everything that I've done. Maybe I would have done things sooner.
And to express yourself in the face of those that would cast doubt. And maybe that's in the form of parents, maybe that's in the form of a professor or a teacher or, someone in your life that says, oh, that's not good for you, or I really think you should do this. And, or the worst thing you ever hear as a woman is, well, women can't do that. It's like, what? And so there are so many young women who need to feel that their thoughts and feelings are valid and that they are more than capable of having a voice in their path and their trajectory. We get asked at the age of 17 and 18, for some going into college, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? Well, I would tell any girl at that age that 90% of the women who think that they know what they want to do at 17 or 18 end up doing something different along the way as they get older. There are a few, and I think that's amazing when someone has so much confidence and conviction and passion that they come out of school knowing I want to be a doctor. I'm going to be a neurologist. They're off to school. They finish med school and they succeed at every bit of that. That's phenomenal. But it's a greater chance that at 17 or 18, the small world that you might live in, the bubble that you're in, hasn't even exposed you to the possible career that you could have. So yes, have confidence and pursue passion. Pursue passion relentlessly is what I always like to say to women. And they've often put their passions on the back burner for what they feel are obligations. And so confidence would make a big difference in that.
Yeah. Even when I did the pivot, there were people who said, oh, why are you doing that? And then there were some who said, take me with you.
Yeah.
So because they thought it was great that I was going to just disrupt things and do something different. And there were people who thought, oh, she's just lost her mind. But the truth is that I did. And when I pivoted, I actually flew all the way across the country to Seattle to take a job. And I did end up doing it. And I ended up becoming a project manager. So
That's phenomenal. Okay, so you said earlier that you're an avid reader. Um, I love you talk about reading in the bathtub. I actually did that too. The favorite saying I ever had about reading was bookmarks are for quitters. And I just thought, well, that's hysterical because I always had the hardest time putting a book down. I was like that kid that walked through the kitchen and the living room with a book in her face. And my mom would be like, Karen, Karen. And I'm like, what? And she's like, I've been talking to you for 5 minutes. Did you not hear me? No, I was in my book. I don't listen when I'm in my book. I still to that day am like that. Tell me share with our audience some of the books that you've read that have made a difference. I always like to leave our listeners with other resources that they can tap into. Podcasts, you mentioned liking videos, anything along those lines.
okay, so one of my favorite all-time nonfiction books is one called The Slight Edge. And it basically talks about accomplishing goals, and he spoke about it in terms of compound interest, which was something that as a kid I learned about. The banks these days is not where you want to be putting your money necessarily, but at the time I had a savings account and I learned about compound interest. And there's these books that everyone's heard of, like there's the Don't Sweat the Small Stuff and those kinds of things. But if you do sweat the small stuff, if you do, it compounds over time. So if you're trying to do something, like you're trying to lose weight or you're trying to get into a walking habit, every single day that you are doing those things, it builds up over time. So that to me was a huge book. In terms of podcasts, there's a few that I listen to regularly, believe it or not. I listen to Mel Robbins. I find her entertaining also because she used to be a lawyer. So she, we have that in common. So I find it interesting, and she's very curious, lifelong learner, willing to put herself out there and admit that she doesn't know everything. So I find that one very enjoyable. And I like listening to your podcast, of course. And there's a few others. There's one called Project Management Happy Hour, which is for project managers, which is really fun.
I had many happy hours as a project manager. It's almost necessary for survival. I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah. And in terms of other books, I mean, this may be a little out there, but I'll give a shout out to a book club I belong to. It's a sci-fi and horror book club. And every other month is sci-fi or horror. Big sci-fi fan. Horror, not as much, but I like them too. So I end up reading a lot of those. And I like belonging to the book club, not just for the camaraderie, but it sort of assigns me a book that I would not have otherwise thought of. And I don't always like the book, but it gets me reading different things.
I always have a fiction going, a nonfiction going, a podcast that I'm listening to, an audiobook. There's I have a Spotify account, and occasionally I'm listening to music, but more often than not, it's my Audible or it's a podcast that I'm listening to. So I know you are a lot the same way. So before I close this out, the last thing I would ask is, what one piece of advice would you want to give to a future super smart woman? What would you want somebody to walk away with today?
I would want them to walk away with, if you have decided that you want to do something, don't let someone stop you. You may need help along the way, and maybe you need to get yourself a mentor, or you need to break it down into those little tasks and start smaller than what your ultimate dream is. But you shouldn't just say, oh, yeah, I'll do that later. Because the truth is, first of all, we never know if we have later. And secondly, later, could just be too late. You want to start working toward that. You can always change your mind and pivot to something else, but just do the things you want to do.
And you've learned something along the way, even if you do pivot.
Oh, for sure.
I actually spoke with a young woman yesterday, and she is getting started with a blog and a podcast, and, just had some questions, and her hesitation has been, well, it's, I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I'm going to be good enough. And I'm like, but you have I can hear it in your voice. You have the passion. Nobody's going to care if you or ah one too many times. I started out with that same fear and feeling. I listened to the first one I recorded, and I thought, I think there were 32 ums in that. No one else is going to count your ums unless they're maybe playing a really interesting drinking game. And so what? So what if they do? Go ahead, record it. People love to hear conversation, and absolutely don't wait. Don't delay on pursuing passion. Deborah, thank you so much for joining me today. I love your story. I love the transition that you took yourself through, beyond the age of 30 or 40. We don't have to say, well, I'm already grown up. I'm not going to, change careers. I'm not going to do something new. You took that opportunity. You stepped out there. You tried something new. And that should be an encouragement to any of our listeners. Listeners, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you got something out of this conversation. I did, and I hope that you'll subscribe to the channel and be back with us as we talk to more super smart women. Deborah, again, thank you.
Karen, thank you so much for having me. It was really enjoyable.